Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Thursday the 20th. I was told I finally get to be rid of my Twitter blue check today, but it's still there.
I'm not rooting for Elon. I know there are people who have blue checks who are like, why do I still have one? I'm hoping that Elon keeps my blue check. I don't want to pay him any money, but I'd like to keep it. Obviously, it's messy now, right? That there's no way to distinguish between, it's supposed to be a verification check, and now there's really no way to distinguish between someone who has been verified and someone who has paid him $6 or whatever it is.
This is literally the Sneetches. What was something that was, kind of a status symbol, I'm verified, now is besmirched because now it's mixed in with people who paid $8 who, it's not that like you're a bad human being if you pay for a service, you're not as cool as me because you don't write for a magazine. But I can just see that a lot of folks who have paid for it are like Elon Musk stands who are not someone who are contributing to the richness of my Twitter experience. So this one was kind of like, okay, Mr. Monkey McBean, can you take the star off of my belly so no one thinks I'm a guy who is an Elon Musk fan?
I'm the other way. I hope he forgets about getting rid of our blue checks because I think it does help, even though it is not the status symbol that it once was. Not everybody has them, and as long as I don't have to pay for it, I'd like to just keep it indefinitely. So as long as I'm on Twitter, I mean, who knows? Again, Twitter, I think, is ripe for replacement, but we'll see if that happens.
Also, just a disclaimer, it is spring break, and so children are around. I know we don't have the same editing capabilities as we previously had, so apologize in advance if there are disruptions.
Yes. Now that we have moved away slightly from Blogging Heads, we're still part of the Blogging Heads family, but we're doing more of the logistics ourselves. I don't know how to edit, so what you see is mostly what you get. What I can do is occasionally you'll see that we've stopped it, left, come back. That's about as sophisticated as my editing skills are. I can, if you watch the YouTube channel, I'm able to put music on at the top of the show, but I can't really bleed it into the show and do that nice transition. It would be great as if someone out there wanted to be our tech guru. That would be amazing. Make that happen.
It's more work. Then you got to like talk to somebody and like explain what you want.
Yeah, maybe the DMZ army would be better suited to be flyering their neighborhoods about our shows.
We all have an inner Ron DeSantis, Matt. We don't really do well with human interaction.
Well, maybe we should start there, Bill. That's a good start.
I wasn't trying to sag.
Well, I got into some, it's funny, during our extensive pregame conversation, you and I were both talking about how we had recently written columns where people criticized us on Twitter, and if they had just read the column, they would have their criticisms would have been answered. But I sent a tweet yesterday, and it was ill-advised. Tweeting usually is. But I have been noticing videos, pictures of Ron DeSantis where he doesn't look presidential. And I know this is such a superficial way of judging politics. And obviously it's not my main mode of analysis. But look, there are people, I remember if you saw Bill Clinton in 1991 or 1992, he just had an aura, like a charisma about him. Just he had this, like an energy and confidence, right? And I would say George W. Bush had that in 1999, 2000 or whatever. But George W. Bush kind of had that cockiness, and they kind of looked like a president. Barack Obama had a different version of it, but he had a sort of a glow. Ron DeSantis lately looks afraid. He does not look confident. I told you last week I don't think he should have lost that weight. Seems very superficial. It is. But for those people who say we only ever comment about the way that a female politician looks, you're wrong, because I'm going there with Ron DeSantis. So anyway, there was a story about him in Politico. And I believe the story was about how, I I think it was the story. I could be wrong. There were so many stories about DeSantis falling apart, but it might have been about donors who are kind of fleeing
Mhm.
DeSantis world. There was also a story about a congressman a Florida congressman who just endorsed Donald Trump, and he said that Ron DeSantis won't even return his calls. This is
Mhm.
a Florida congressman.
Mhm.
Anyway, there was a picture of DeSantis, and I tweeted something to the effect of, "Look, we all take bad photos. Heavens knows I do." Um, but I'm seeing this a lot lately, and I think this is indicative of a larger problem where maybe it's body language. I'm not sure what it is, but DeSantis doesn't look happy, doesn't look confident, doesn't seem to have that aura. And of course, that opened the door for me being dragged on Twitter and dunked on by a lot of people,
There's
including
definitely
some people I thought were friends and allies
there's
who
a
apparently are not.
DeSantis stan community on Twitter. You make fun of DeSantis, there are certain people that come out and get really upset with you.
It is. He has a lot of touchy, defensive defenders, which is not the case for all politicians. They're not all equal when it comes to this
Mm.
in terms of their protectiveness.
It's
But yeah,
shocking that Ron DeSantis would attract touchy defensive people.
it isn't. Maybe that's telling too. Um, but whatever the case may be, I think it's a thing, and it's obviously not my primary way of doing political analysis. I think it actually tracks with other things that are happening. Um, and I don't think I'm the only person to have a sense that DeSantis, and Bill, you and I talked about this extensively last week, right here in the DMZ. You in fact, well, let's go to you. You started a conversation about whether DeSantis should even run or not. Yeah, Matthew Iglesias, not Matthew Iglesias, Ross Douthat wrote
Yeah.
about it in the New York Times. I saw somebody, a former Paul Ryan staffer, on Way Too Early. Didn't mention your name, but just sort of kind of saying, maybe, maybe DeSantis should sit this one out. So you kind of were at the forefront,
Well,
I think.
because Duthat cited my piece, although he took the opposite view.
Yeah.
But I think because Dowd had a Sunday New York Times come on the subject, that made it more of like a cable talker, topic.
Yeah. Well, but I think that where do these memes or ideas come from?
Mhm.
There are people who are, I think Malcolm Gladwell had a book. There are people who are like the innovator, and then it takes someone else to popularize the idea, and whatever the case may be,
What we're
you
saying is
can
the ideas start here. They start here in the DMZ,
start
man.
right
This is
here.
where you come to find out what's going to happen, next week. But
I'll be honest, you're joking. I think you've got a point, and I think we're underrated. But continue.
But DeSantis is obviously it's become it's funny because Dowd was trying to make the point that it has to run, and Nate Silver had a tweet linking to my piece, was saying, "Oh, DeSantis has to run." There's definitely this group of people that have bought into the "you got to meet your moment, carpe diem" theory of presidential campaigning, but that's not the thread of the commentary you're getting on cable TV now and some other and political and elsewhere. The rumblings of hey, this isn't really working out for you, guy, are happening, and I can't say it's going to mean he's not going to run. He might still have a group of people around him who are still egging him on and want to get paid, being his political consultants, and he might have the ego to be unwilling to climb down at this point. But he's in a jam. It's part of the critique I get is, well, look, he's still in a great position. He's still, in the 20s. He's still, or even 30s. He's still the number two. Other people have gone from there to be number one. So why would you walk away from that? And that's all true as far as what's happened historically. But what you're seeing in the past 2 months is someone who hasn't figured out what it's going to take to go from number two to number one. And I mean, it's very similar to 2016. Trump gets in your head. Trump has
that whole argument. He's still at 20%. That's a 2016 argument. That's us talking ourselves into believing that somehow Trump won't take over, right? I mean, but it, so here, let me just give you my sort of quick take on this. I think that what has happened is that DeSantis has been exposed. I think that I'm using, I don't know, the royal we here, but
Mhm.
like, those, a lot of us were sort of hoping that at some point we would see Ron DeSantis and that he would be magical. And by the way, he has a great argument, right? He's got a generational change argument. He's got an argument that he's more competent than Trump, that he's not going to send those crazy tweets. He's got an argument that he actually wins elections, unlike Trump. So he's got an argument on paper. And then we thought, then he's going to show up and he's going to have the charisma and he's going to be able to slay this dragon, which is Donald Trump. Well, that's the part of the equation that fell apart. I think we have now seen DeSantis in a way that we hadn't seen him before, even though he's been around. We've seen him in Florida, but there he's behind a podium in control. Now, in the past month, we've kind of seen this sort of this book roll out, and now he's been exposed. And I'll tell you what it reminds me of. It's sort of like think in football. You can have these great college quarterbacks. They can win the Heisman Trophy. They can win the national championship or whatever. They look great in college. And then we draft them. And now you never know if a quarterback who looks great, it's really a crapshoot as to whether or not they can win in the NFL. And people like Tom Brady were drafted in the 6th round draft, end up being, the GOAT. Other people who, think of like RG3, who played for the Redskins and just kind of fell apart. They don't have it, for whatever reason, once they get to the NFL. As Jerry Glanville said, it stands for not for long. I think that's what's happened to Ron DeSantis. Like, we didn't know if he was ready for prime time until he got on the field and took a couple hits. And now, again, it's like maybe he gets his act together and proves me wrong. But like, it's just like, I've seen enough that now I'm pretty confident saying, like, I just don't think he has it. He just doesn't.
It reminds me of Elizabeth Warren's campaign. In that Warren had a real good slow build in the 2019 phase by establishing herself as the queen of ideas, policies for everything. She's figured it out. She's figured out how to craft the policies and how to sell the policies. And sort of like one white paper after another, it became more and more exciting to people that she had all these things figured out. And then at some point in the middle of 2019, the question is, well, what about healthcare? And then she has to retreat into her policy walk bunker and figure out how she's going to do single payer in a way that's politically sellable, and it's different from Bernie, and it's not as abrupt and radical as his. And it just didn't gel because it got hit from all sides as being, it was too far left for the mods and not left enough for the Bernie-crats. And the veneer of her policy infallibility fell away.
Mm-hmm.
So what you said, DeSantis had an early hype is he's the dragon slayer. He takes no crap. He is fearless. And then he looks in Donald Trump's eyes and he's afraid.
Yeah.
So it undercuts the brand. I mean, in his case, the brand is in a much more nascent place than where Warren. I mean, Warren actually got to a point where she was, tied with Biden briefly. But I mean, and someone was saying to me on Twitter, well, he hasn't even announced the campaign yet.
Doesn't matter.
One, he's effectively running.
Yeah.
He has a book. He's on a national book tour. When Trump attacks him, he's asked about it, he answers. He was asked by Piers Morgan, "Why are you different than Donald Trump?" He answers. If you're engaging with the front runner, guess what? You're in the game, buddy.
The public's not going to say like, yeah, I'm starting to develop opinions about Ron DeSantis, but I've been instructed by the judge to discount them because he's not officially launched an exploratory committee yet. That just doesn't happen. And the other thing too is, Bill, I think that because DeSantis needs to demonstrate toughness, he needs to front, he needs to flex, but he's afraid to go after Trump, then he's going after Mickey Mouse instead of Donald Trump. And Larry Kudlow, of all people, had a quote very recently saying, like, you're not running for president against Walt Disney. Um, there's a warning that this war on Disney is beginning to backfire.
It's amazing how these things turn. I mean, he was so jacked up on his Disney argument that he dedicates a chapter in his book to it. Look how awesome I am. I'm not afraid of Disney. I'm not afraid of the biggest employer in my state. Well, it's literally the biggest, but it's sure one of the biggest, and it's clearly the most recognizable economic drivers of his state. I'm not afraid to go after them. If they're gonna be woke, I'm gonna take them on. And if you go back to November when Donald Trump announced, all the counter was, well, that was such a low energy announcement. Oh my goodness, God, it was
It
so
was.
blah. Where's this campaign going? It's going nowhere. Ron DeSantis, he's the Disney slayer. This guy's got the hot hand.
Look, I'll plead guilty to that. I thought Ron DeSantis, I was much more I don't think I predicted he would win, but I was much more bullish on DeSantis at that point. You don't have to go back that far, as you're noting, to find a time where Trump did not seem to have the energy. Trump had a lot of baggage and frankly was being blamed, I think correctly, for blowing the midterms. And DeSantis won by 20 points. He's got all this energy. But I feel like DeSantis is I don't want to say squandered it, but he's lost that in the past month.
So to give DeSantis a bit of a break, I mean, so it was not wholly ludicrous to conclude, hey, Trump's fading. His numbers sagged. Trump's numbers sagged after the midterm, and DeSantis, had some early momentum. So it's not crazy to think, hey, all I got to do is just make my case, and Trump's going to fall apart on his own, and his people, or at least enough of his people, will gravitate toward me organically without me having to go 10 rounds in a cage with Donald Trump. But you tried that.
Yeah. But you had Ron DeSantis not rising to the occasion, not being charismatic. And then you had, I think, the Alvin Bragg, indictment thing clearly helped boost Trump. And those two things, I think, have dramatically changed the race. And it may be decisively. Like, this may be, like, there may have been a moment a month ago where it looked like this was going to be a real race. And this may just be what happens now. It may just be that we're on this.
He has to adjust at a big. He can't assume that his initial game plan takes him there. His initial game plan, failed at first contact. He needs to adjust. If he's willing to really go at Trump hard, I'm not saying it's guaranteed to work. I just don't see you go from number 2 to number 1 without taking number 1 down. It's not going to happen organically. So much stuff has happened to Donald Trump that would have felled a normal politician that has not felled him. So why would you think it would naturally fall apart this time?
Very good point. We could talk about this all day. We should probably move on because
I got a hard out.
We could talk about this, and we have talked about this. And guess what? This will be here next week. I want to talk a little bit about the gun thing, Bill.
I was surprised by your column, Matt.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I like to be. I don't want to be like erratic and inscrutable, but being surprising for a columnist is generally good. What surprised you?
Well, I mean, we don't talk about guns a lot because we don't like to talk about sad things. But when we have talked about it, you've always been, I mean, and you're not backing off from this, but you're a pretty firm Second Amendment guy, and even in some of the more gruesome instances, you've not really backed off that, though you are for background checks and red flag laws, right?
Yes, and I mean, I am currently kind of grappling with my position on this, and I just had Stephen Gutowski, who runs a site called thereload.com, and he's a CNN contributor, formerly of the Washington Free Beacon. So he's a conservative person who's a gun expert, who now works for CNN and tries to help them get it right. There's a difference between a clip and a magazine, and most of us in the MSM don't always know the nomenclature. So I had him on my podcast yesterday. I'm not sure when it's going to publish, but stay tuned for that. But I'm sort of trying to grapple with this because, yes, Bill, I do not think we should infringe on the Second Amendment in the sense I think that, Americans who aren't convicted felons or don't have mental problems that are, sort of diagnosed. We do have a right to bear arms. I don't think we should have. I don't think we should have automatic weapons. I don't think it's sort of a carte blanche thing. And I also think, you know, if you've just seen everything that's happened since Columbine, all the shootings, um, we've got a problem. And just in the past couple of weeks, we've got a problem. And I don't think guns are not the only problem. But put aside like 3 kids at a Christian school, being gunned down and 3 adults, a couple weeks ago in Nashville. Just in the past week, we've had these stories about young people who, knock on the wrong door, or pull into the wrong driveway, and try to get into the wrong car accidentally, and they're just blown away. Knocking on someone's door is not probable cause to shoot them, and so it just seems like we've got people who are armed to the teeth, trigger happy, and freaked out, paranoid. And I think news is part of the problem. I think political rhetoric is part of the problem. But there is also clearly a lot of people driving around with guns, a lot of people ready to pick up a gun.
Have you written about this Texas case? The guy who drove to a protest and shot a Black Lives Matter protester.
And Governor Abbott wants to pardon him.
Right. And that's come out even since that case. The things that the person convicted said in text to his friends that he was looking to shoot people at the protest.
That goes to my column, which is the way that I grew up in a home with my dad's a prison guard for 30 years, avid hunter, gun owner. We were taught to respect guns, and and it's a last resort to ever have to use a firearm. That should be in self-defense, but a last resort. And those were values inculcated in me that I thought were sort of traditional conservative country Andy Griffith values. Sheriff Taylor never carried a gun. He said, I figure I've got enough of them here. If I need them, I'll go get them. But, that's what I grew up with. And this now, shoot first, ask questions later mentality. And let's all take a Christmas card picture, holding our AR-15. That's not the kind of values that I was taught.
So where does that leave you? Do you think so there's a certain amount of policy reform you'd accept universal background checks, you'd accept red flag laws, correct?
Yeah, I would as of today. And, I was also talking to Stephen Gutowski about, this other idea about having magazine, and I'm not great at talking about guns. I'm not an expert by any means. But essentially limiting the amount of ammo, so that in the case that there is a mass shooting, they have to reload, and that maybe buys you some time.
Well, then there's I read about this several years ago. When you look at the period when we had an assault weapons ban, 94 to 2004, there's an argument that the ban was so porous that it didn't really have that much of a direct effect on things. But there was also a magazine limit in that, and there's some research that suggests that did have impact.
I can imagine that would have more of an impact because, Bill, there are 400 million guns in America today and 24 million AR-15s. I believe that's correct. So there's a lot of guns out there. So even if we ban guns today, even if you tried to do some sort of gun buyback today, a lot of guns floating around. Although, as you and I have noted, it seems like every time there's a shooting, they've just went and bought it at a store 2 weeks earlier. So, but there are a lot of guns floating around, but ammunition gets used. And so
you'd accept the magazine limit.
I mean, dude, I am open to this. I am basically now at the point, there was a time when I was reflexively against any sort of gun control because of a fear of a slippery slope argument. Okay, and so the slippery slope essentially is that you give them an inch, they take a foot.
Mhm.
And I think there was a time when if you really cared about defending the Second Amendment and you feared a situation where there would be someday gun confiscation or something like that, you would want to basically nip it in the bud. But I think, Bill, we have seen so many things happening over the just recent years where I think if you're a parent, a rational person, um, I'm now looking for solutions where we can look. You need to be able to, if you want to have a gun at your house to protect yourself, you should. If you want to go hunting, you should be able to do that. But I also, I don't think it's a great idea that we have all of these people sitting around paranoid in their house all day, watching Fox News, convinced that if someone knocks on their door, they're there to rape them or something. Like this is not a good thing. And by the way, this you've got your like armed to the teeth, and you're going to shoot first and ask questions later. Like this is a problem. So I'm looking for all sorts of solutions. Red flag laws to me, I think, make a lot of sense. But I think that's part. Now, look, here's the problem, Bill, though, as I talked to Stephen Gutowski yesterday, almost, none of these things in and of themselves will prevent the next shooting or stop the last shooting, right? But I do think that if we take steps, responsible steps to try to fix things as we can, reform things, eventually there's going to be someone who would have been shot who now is alive.
Mhm.
And seems to me to be a good thing to do.
Let me ask you this. So I felt like in the past several years, you've seen on the right more talk that this is not a gun problem, this is a mental illness problem. Like they were more willing to introduce that into the conversation as a way to redirect away
Mm-hmm.
from assault weapon bans and other sorts of hard limits on things. And then in reaction to that, you get this really started in earnest after the Parkland school massacre. Okay, well, if mental illness is the issue, then let's have a red flag law. So there's a way for people who are seeing troubling signs. Not everybody who has a diagnosed mental illness is a violent threat to themselves or others. But if you see some more troubling signs that there is real risk of harm afoot, you either a law enforcement officer or a family member or a work colleague can go to a judge and petition for a red flag order, which would allow law enforcement to confiscate what weapons are in possession and prevent them from buying new weapons, generally speaking, for a year. There's obviously different ways you can construct these laws. So Florida passes one. Now we're up to 19. And then last year, after the Uvalde massacre, you get the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Kirsten Sinema, Chris Murphy, Tom Tillis, John Cornyn, they come together. They say, okay, we're not going to make a national red flag law. We know that's too much for Republicans. But we can say, here's a pot of money that if you pass a red flag law in your state, you can access that money and it'll help you implement it. So it's an incentive to take that step. How many states have passed a red flag law since that has occurred? When I wrote about this 2 weeks ago, the answer was none. Just yesterday, Michigan passed one. It's about to be signed by the governor. But that's now a Democratic trifecta state. And almost all the states that have a red flag law now, once it gets to 20, almost all of them are democratically run states or blue-leaning states. What is the obstacle on the right? I mean, again, the NRA types were the ones saying this is primarily a mental illness issue. So why are they resisting a policy based on that premise?
First, let me say, I think that our problems in America, our problems with violence, including gun violence, there are many, racism is a part of it, right? In some cases, racism is the cause. Some of it, I think, these stand your ground laws, which I completely believe a person should be allowed to defend themselves if their life is threatened. If a reasonable person would believe their life is threatened, I think now we've got a, uh, hey man, I thought this person might be mad at me, so I'm going to shoot them mentality, right? Um, I think that part of the problem is a political environment where political rhetoric is heated. I think the media plays into scaring Americans. Like, so I think there are a whole bunch of things. And I think mental health is also one of a legitimate part of this, obviously, right? But to your point, I think too many Republicans obviously used mental health, even though it's a completely valid part of this discussion. They use that as a way to avoid talking about guns and to change the subject. And then when you get around to, okay, if mental health is the problem, what about these red flag laws? Um, then they oppose it because they don't really want to do anything to solve the problem, and they see any any st- any step as a kind of um, a slippery slope. So, um, to the point that there are legitimate fears. I mean, it would be a legitimate fear about, what if I don't like someone and I go and tell the police or tell a psychologist that they're a danger, and then that person has their Second Amendment rights deprived unfairly. That would be like the only legitimate reason to oppose a red flag law is that. But to me, that doesn't seem like a valid enough concern, because usually, by the way, when there are these shootings, the mass shootings, not the guy comes to your door and you shoot him, but the mass shootings where you know, almost always there's like, yeah, we thought there was something wrong with Bob. We even, not Bob, not our Bob, but with Joe Blow, everyone knew there was something up with him. We even called the FBI, but nobody did anything. Like, it almost always is the case that it potentially could have been prevented. And again, they almost always have gone to a store and bought a gun very recently.
Well, in the Tennessee case, to me, is the most obvious one. The family had the person getting mental, it was in some kind of therapy. They knew there was a gun on the premises that they got rid of. So, like, all the ingredients that you would have for a red flag order were there. They literally did all the things that you would do if a red flag law was in place. There, they had the information to go to a judge and say, "Hey, I need a red flag order," but they didn't have that option in Tennessee. And the governor and lieutenant governor have said, we're open to this. And yet the legislature said, yeah, we're just going to expel two Democrats from the legislature instead of talking about a red flag order. I mean, this kind of speaks to your point, like, what's happening culturally,
Yes,
on the right, that makes it difficult for them just to do what is a pretty light reform. I mean, red flag law is hardly, mass gun grabbing or outright bans.
yeah. I mean, basically, we've got 400 million guns in America. We've got a country that is incredibly divided. We had a COVID-19 pandemic where people became more lonely and more isolated. We've got all sorts of trends and themes where people aren't getting married like they used to. They're not having families like there's a lot of societal shifts. You have Twitter and social media that is aggravating and dividing us and throwing out controversies all the time. You've got Donald Trump and cable news channels that are angering people and scaring people. You've got a sense that if someone looks at you wrong, it's okay to shoot them. And we'll, not only that, but we'll protect you as long as the people you shoot are on the other tribe and you're in the right state, we'll protect. Like there are so many problems. And there's a mental health problem. There's like a spiritual problem in this country. There is d- a political rhetoric problem, a violent rhetoric problem. Like, I don't know to what degree video games factor into this. Like there's we live in a weird, dramatically different world um, than we used to. And then throw in now, like people, like I told this story on Twitter, Bill, but I'll tell it to you real quick because I think it might be helpful. In 2004, I was managing a statewide political campaign in North Dakota, and our media consultant, we were going to film several commercials in one day. Our entire TV budget, we had to film it all in one day just for budgetary reasons. And so that meant a lot of before the media guys flew out to Fargo and we did this commercial, all the logistics had to be set up in advance so we could film 10 commercials or 7 commercials in one day. And part of that involved me driving around and scoping out places where we could like have cows, for example, or cattle, like in my candidate walking with whatever. Um, and so our media consultant, like Joe Bob over, an hour away from Fargo, has a great, farm. And this is before GPS. So, and by the way, I don't even know if you'd have GPS in rural North Dakota, but even in 2004, it wasn't a thing really. So anyway, I had these sketchy directions, and I think I had someone with me, as I recall, but we end up driving around for like an hour and a half. I'm totally lost. And I pull in, finally, out of desperation, I pull into a farmhouse and I get out of the car. I'm going to knock and ask for directions. And then all of a sudden, 2 or 3 dogs are just unleashed and they come at me. And man, they're like barking, biting. Like I barely get in the car, barely avoid getting bit. Start my truck. It's a truck, actually. It was like a SUV type thing. Start my vehicle and just haul ass out this gravel driveway. And I'm going down the road. Next thing I know, there's like a truck behind me, basically outrunning me, sort of starting to run me off. They never hit me, but sort of push me off the road. And I basically pull over. They essentially pull me over in the middle of nowhere in North Dakota. And they come up and they're like, "What were you doing back there?" And I'm like, I was lost. And then they're like, "Well, if you weren't up to no good, why'd you drive away so fast?" And I'm like, by the way, they didn't really have a Southern accent. It was more like, "What were you doing there? Don't you know?" And whatever, however they talk. And they're like, but they were like, if you didn't, if you weren't up to no good, why did you drive away so fast? I'm like, why did you sick your dogs on me? Like that's why I was getting out of there. Now I was able to talk them down because um, because I had all sorts of political paraphernalia in my car, bumper stickers on the car, and I'm like, we're running a Republican campaign. Uh, Here's all the stuff I've got, and they let me go. But I thought about 2 things, which I don't know the answer to, Bill. One, what would I have done if I had a gun on me? What might I have done if I had a gun? 2, what if I wasn't a white dude who's a Republican? How would that have gone down? And like, I don't know the answer to those 2 questions, but I think those 2 questions speak to the problem that we have today, man. People are paranoid. Um, they're very defensive. Um, and if, I mean, I could tell you, like, if you've ever driven like in rush hour, I think there was a situation a few years ago where someone prominent someone who was like in the conservative movement, their son like pulled a gun on somebody like on the GW Parkway in traffic. Like if I'm like in a sketchy neighborhood and some people want to like murder me, I would be glad that I had like, a gun on me, right? Um, what's it called? Carry. Um, concealed carry, right?
Yeah.
You wish that you had a gun at that moment.
Mhm.
But there have been other occasions where I'm probably glad I didn't. Because, like, a situation like that where those guys, like, nothing happened, it was totally uncool. I don't know how close I came to being killed, but, like, that could have escalated much faster if I mean, and who knows what would have happened. Anyway, I've talked enough.
I gotta go pretty soon, but I do want to talk quickly about the debt limit
Yeah.
dance going on. I got a piece at the Washington Monthly about it. So McCarthy now has a bill. Uh, uh, it's not a 10-year balanced budget bill, but there are lots of cuts, lots of things that go after Biden's stuff. It undoes student loan forgiveness, it undoes energy tax credits, and takes away money from IRS enforcement, things like that. And Biden has been saying, I got a plan. Where's your plan? And we're saying, well, here's my plan. Now let's talk. And Biden's saying, well, I'm not going to talk if you're going to choose debt ceiling. Like, you're gonna play games with it and say if I don't pass your cuts, then you're going to blow up the debt ceiling. My argument in the monthly is now is the time for Biden to start negotiations. I think it was smart to wait this long. It was smart to force McCarthy's hand and get him to put a bill together, so the Democrats can take their shots at what the Republicans have offered. It may not even pass the House, which would probably even be even better for Biden. But even if it did pass, at that point you'd say, you have your plan, here's our plan, let's talk. And the Democrats have reasonably said that the debt ceiling should not be used as a hostage. But what I think is being overlooked is the way McCarthy has talked about it is actually quite different than how Ted Cruz talked about it, or even the way John Boehner talked about it in 2011, or how Newt Gingrich talked about it in 1995, which was much more threatening. In the case of Gingrich and Cruz, even gleeful at the possibility of wielding it like a hammer. And all those other cases, there were real specific threats being made. The Republicans in 1995 were they had the House and the Senate, they were putting together full-blown bills with cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, environment, education, and plopping it on Clinton's desk and saying, do this or government shutdown and debt limit default. Boehner said, we will not raise the debt limit unless there are spending cuts that are bigger than the size of the debt limit increase. That's a hard number ask. And Cruz was saying, do this or defund Obamacare, or you don't get, the government's not going to be open and we're going to blow up debt limit. McCarthy has not. McCarthy has a bill now, but he has not said pass this bill or else the debt limit gets breached. He's saying, here's my plan. Let's have a negotiation. That's a much more legitimate approach to things.
Could it be they've actually learned something?
Well, I think McCarthy is much more like a Mitch McConnell type. And even the case of Boehner, Boehner had that hard ask, but he's very flexible on what that meant. So what happened in 2011 was, okay, the spending cuts were equal to the size of the debt increase, but the debt limit increase was for 1 year, and the cuts were projected to be spread over 10 years, which is hard, which is a relatively mild thing. And effectively got implemented without the universe collapsing. Look, it obviously limits what Democrats would like to do with the government if you're having that kind of cap on things, but it's not the same as going into full blown austerity. I'm not saying that Biden should be accepting the McCarthy parameters here and just doing what McCarthy's asking. McCarthy has a weak hand. McCarthy has a 4-vote majority. 18 Republicans are in Biden-won districts who don't want to go nearly as far as what the Freedom Caucus people want to do. So Biden's got cards to play. to ensure that whatever cuts occur are pretty mild and don't go at the things that are now Biden legacy items. Yes, I know, Les. Um, so I think Biden can go into the negotiation with a strong hand to play, and Biden could even say, let's keep in mind here, separate from the debt limit, you got to pass spending bills by September 30th to keep the government open. That's the end of the fiscal year. So you have to, the Republicans control the House. You have to have a negotiation to keep the government open no matter what. Even if you pass a clean debt limit today, you still are going to negotiate the budget. And when the debt limit deadline happens, it's still kind of fuzzy. You know, the Treasury Department said June a few months ago, but that will get reassessed after tax receipts come in after the tax filing deadline. Other entities have said, yeah, it might be more like July, August, September. Well, now you're getting pretty close to when you got to negotiate anyway for the government deadline. So Biden could say, I am ready. Now we have a Republican plan. I'm ready to talk about how to come together on the budget, but I'm not going to discuss the debt limit. If Kevin McCarthy says the debt limit one time, then I walk out the door. Meeting's over. And McCarthy could say, Biden could say what he wants, but we all know that we got to do this before we raise the debt limit. They can characterize it in their own ways to their own constituencies, but have a good faith negotiation, which they're going to have to do regardless. And since it's not the case that McCarthy it's not a gun to the head situation. It's not do this my way or the debt limit's a goner. He's not saying that. So there's a way out of this, this mess with a little bit of kabuki that I think Biden should recognize. He's in as good a position as he's going to get. And the position could get worse. You might get the far right making some reasonable demands if you wait too long, and then that puts McCarthy in a tougher position. Right now, the far right's been kind of defanged, where McCarthy puts us out there, and they're not saying your speakership's over. So take advantage of this moment when the right's kind of at bay to negotiate something that's kind of mild.
If history's a predictor, Bill, you floated this idea, and it will be conventional wisdom by next week. So congrats in advance. I know you got to run.
I do, yes.
Follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show. Obviously, read me at the Beast. Pre-order my book, Filthy Rich Politicians. Bill Scher, what do you got?
I've plugged all I have to plug. So we are 3 months away from book publishing.
Yeah, I think July 18th.
Okay, so almost exactly 3 months. But we got to pre-order. Pre-orders are important.
Very important. Nothing. If you like me, if you like what we do here, nothing more you could do to help me. I'll say that than pre-order the book. So please do.
All right. Till next week, Matt.
All right. See you back here in the DMZ then. Have a good one.